winter of 1940 was dark, not just in the skies over Europe, but in the imagination of every Allied commander. Night after night, the Luftwaffe bombed British cities under the cover of darkness. The blitz turned the night itself into a weapon. Radar on the ground could warn of incoming aircraft, but once the sirens began to wail, there was no way to stop them in the air. Fighters like the Spitfire and Hurricane were fast and agile, but blind. By the time their pilots saw the enemy, it was already too late. In those early years, night fighter was almost a contradiction in terms. The British tried equipping their Defiance and Bow fighters with crude early radars, but few survived long enough to call them effective. Across the Atlantic, American engineers and strategists watched and learned. The U.S. Army Air Forces knew the same threat could one day darken their skies, and they would need something no nation yet possessed: a fighter that could see in the dark. At the Northrop Corporation in California, a small team of engineers began sketching what seemed impossible: an aircraft built entirely around radar. Led by Jack Northrop and Chief Engineer Vladimir Pavleka, they proposed something radical: a twin-engine, twin-boom machine, painted black from nose to tail. Its belly would house the newest secret from the MIT Radiation Laboratory, the SCR-720 radar, capable of detecting a single aircraft 10 miles away, even in total darkness. It was to be a predator of the night, unseen yet all-seeing. When the proposal reached the Army Air Forces, skepticism was immediate. "No fighter that big will ever catch the enemy," one colonel remarked. It was nearly the size of a medium bomber, but General Carl Spaatz approved it anyway. The war was evolving faster than doctrine could keep up, and America could no longer afford to fight by daylight alone. By early 1942, as war raged across the Pacific and Europe, the first prototype took shape. The test pilots called it the XP-61 and nicknamed it the Widow. Its first flight, on May 26, 1942, over the Mojave Desert, was like watching a shadow come alive. Its twin Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engines growled like distant thunder, and the black paint absorbed the evening light until it vanished into the sky. One pilot said, "You didn't fly the Widow, you became part of it." Inside the cockpit, however, it was unlike any aircraft before. 3 men, pilot, gunner, and radar operator, sat in tight quarters, surrounded by dials that glowed faint green under red light. In front of the radar scope, the operator could see what no human eye could: blips of light where enemy planes lurked unseen. A voice over intercom whispered through static, "Target bearing 270, range 6 miles, closing." What had once been intuition was now science. For the first time, a machine had given men a new sense, a mechanical sight that pierced the dark. But the P-61 was not just a flying laboratory. It carried lethal weight: 4 20mm cannons mounted beneath the fuselage and 4 50 caliber machine guns in a remote-controlled dorsal turret. It could climb to 33,000 feet and hit 370 miles per hour, fast enough to intercept anything flying at night. Northrop had built not only a hunter, but a fortress. As production began in 1943, the black paint became more than camouflage. It was identity. Crews who saw the aircraft for the first time described it as something otherworldly. It had no graceful lines, no bright insignia. It was menace in motion. At bases in Florida and California, pilots trained in strict secrecy. They learned to fly without light, guided only by instruments and the ghostly glow of the radar. They learned to trust the voice behind them, the radar operator calling range, altitude, and heading. In that eerie teamwork, the bond between men became absolute. They had to, because in combat, visibility was zero. By late 1943, the first operational squadrons, the 422nd and 425th Night Fighter Squadrons, were formed. Their mission: protect Allied bombers and intercept Luftwaffe raiders over occupied France and Germany. The aircraft had never been tested in real combat, and few believed it would succeed. But those who had seen the radar in action knew something had changed. The night was no longer the enemy's ally. It had turned, quietly, completely, into America's domain. "We were hunters," one pilot would later say, "but our prey never even knew we were there." By the spring of 1944, the war over Europe had entered a new and deadly rhythm. Every night, under the soft light of the moon, the Luftwaffe sent its bombers and reconnaissance planes across the channel, probing Allied positions, attacking convoys, and striking the ports of southern England. They believed the night still belonged to them. For years it had. The German Night Fighter Corps, the Nachtjagdgeschwader, had built an entire doctrine on darkness. They used ground-controlled intercepts, spotlights, and the faint glow of moonlight to hunt British bombers. But what they didn't know was that something new was waiting in the clouds, something they could neither see nor hear. At RAF Charmy Down, near Bath, the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron had just received its first shipment of the new American aircraft, the P-61 Black Widow. It looked unlike anything the British had ever seen. Big, hulking, painted midnight black, with long twin booms and a barrel-shaped fuselage. It was both elegant and menacing. A Royal Air Force observer whispered, half in awe, "It looks like death itself." Each crew of 3, pilot, radar operator, and gunner, moved through their pre-flight rituals in near silence. The only light came from the dim amber glow of instrument panels and the ghostly green of the radar scope. When the engines roared to life, their sound was deep and resonant, a low, throaty growl that vibrated through the tarmac. On the night of July 6, 1944, a pair of Black Widows lifted off from Charmy Down under orders to intercept a Luftwaffe Dornier 217 bomber detected near Normandy. The radar operator, sitting in the rear compartment, scanned the phosphorescent screen for movement. Minutes later, a faint echo appeared. "Contact, range 6 miles, heading 090. The pilot banked hard left, throttling up. Outside, the night was featureless. No horizon, no stars, just blackness pressing against the canopy. They flew blind, trusting entirely in the voice behind them. 4 miles, slightly above, closing. 2 miles, still no visual. 1 mile, you should have him." Then, a glint, a silver flicker in the void. The bomber's exhaust shimmered for half a second in the darkness. That was all the pilot needed. He rolled the Widow gently, lined up the gun sight, and pressed the trigger. The 4 20mm cannons beneath the fuselage erupted in thunder. The night exploded in fire. The Dornier disintegrated, its burning wreckage tumbling through the clouds like meteors returning to Earth. The crew watched in silence. No cheers, no words. Only the soft hiss of their oxygen masks and the fading glow of their kill beneath them. It was the first confirmed victory for the P-61. And across occupied Europe, German radar stations began sending back confused reports. Aircraft destroyed by unseen attackers, pilots claiming they were ambushed by shadows. Within weeks, the 425th Night Fighter Squadron joined the hunt over France and Belgium. Their missions followed the same pattern: climb above the clouds, scan for the faint blip of an enemy, then strike without warning. No searchlights, no tracers from the ground, just silence, then sudden death. In the words of one radar operator, "You'd be looking at a green dot on a scope, a little heartbeat in the dark. Then, a minute later, that heartbeat was gone." For the Luftwaffe, it was terrifying. They had no defense against radar-guided fighters. Even their elite night units flying the Messerschmitt, Bf-110G, and Heinkel 219 could not match the P-61's technology. Some German pilots began calling the new American night fighter Der Schwarze Tod, the Black Death. But behind the victories, the learning curve was steep. Many American crews struggled to coordinate between pilot and radar operator under pressure. One wrong turn in total darkness could send the aircraft into a spin or straight into the ground. And the radar, revolutionary as it was, could be temperamental, losing lock at critical moments. Still, they adapted. They learned to interpret every flicker on the scope, to move as one organism. The pilot's hands and the radar operator's voice became one rhythm, mechanical, precise, and deadly. By the end of the summer, P-61s had claimed dozens of kills over France and the Low Countries. Their missions expanded: night escort for bombers, intruder operations behind enemy lines, and defense against V-1 flying bombs. They could hunt anything that moved under the stars. For the men who flew them, the experience was unlike any other in the war. They weren't just flying machines. They were flying ghosts. "We were invisible," recalled Lieutenant Warren Thompson of the 422nd. "They never saw us, only the fire when we were done." As autumn settled over Europe, Word of the mysterious black fighter spread through German radio chatter. Fear replaced arrogance. And for the first time since the Blitz, the balance of the night had shifted. The hunters of darkness had become the hunted. By late 1944, the Black Widow had earned its name in Europe, but its true test awaited half a world away. The war in the Pacific was a different kind of darkness. There were no city lights, no radar nets like in Britain, no ground control to guide them, only endless ocean, the glow of volcanoes, and the flicker of tracer fire reflected on black water. When the first P-61 squadrons arrived on Saipan and Guadalcanal, the crews found an environment almost alien. The air was thick with humidity, radar signals bounced off rainstorms, and at night, the horizon simply disappeared. "Out here," one pilot said, "you didn't just lose the enemy, you could lose the sky itself." But the Japanese Imperial Navy and Air Force were about to learn that the darkness no longer hid them. Night after night, Japanese Betty bombers crept toward Allied airfields and fleets, hoping to drop their payloads unseen. The P-61s were waiting. At Isley Field, Saipan, the 6th Night Fighter Squadron received its orders. Intercept enemy aircraft harassing B-29 bases. Each Widow took off in near silence, twin props carving through humid air, radar scopes glowing faint green. The radar operator sat hunched over his screen, sweat beading on his forehead. "Contact, 12 miles, altitude 5,000. Roger, closing." The pilot, his face lit by red instrument light, banked into the black. Nothing ahead, no stars, no horizon. Just instinct, the hum of engines and the voice behind him guiding every turn. The radar blip grew brighter. The operator's voice quickened. 4 miles, 3, 2, target now dead ahead. Then, a faint silver glimmer. A Japanese bomber, its navigation lights still on, cruising confidently through the night. The pilot squeezed the trigger. The 4 20mm cannons roared, tracing an invisible arc through the dark. The bomber erupted, fragments tumbling into the sea below. For an instant, the explosion lit the clouds, and then all was black again. It became routine, if anything in war could be called that. Each mission followed the same ritual: lift into the void, stalk, strike, vanish. The radar made them gods of the night sky. But the Pacific was merciless. The heat wore down engines, corrosion ate through metal, and radar sets failed at the worst moments. Some crews never came back, lost not to the enemy, but to the ocean's endless silence. Still, the legend of the Widow grew. On Iwo Jima, P-61s guarded B-29s returning from firebombing runs over Tokyo, picking off the desperate night fighters sent to intercept them. At Okinawa, they hunted the kamikaze raids that struck under cover of darkness, their cannons flashing like lightning against the night. In one engagement, a P-61 named Moon Happy destroyed 2 incoming Japanese aircraft in a single sortie. By mid-1945, the Black Widow had become the unseen hand of the Pacific. Wherever bombers slept, it kept vigil. A radar operator named Sergeant Bill Curtis described it best in his diary. "We live between heartbeats out here. The enemy flies by faith. We fly by ghosts." But even as the Widow dominated the skies, its crews felt a creeping loneliness. They worked in the dark, unrecognized, unknown. While daylight aces and P-51s and Corsairs made headlines, the night fighters' victories were classified or simply forgotten. Few ever saw their faces. Yet the Japanese knew. Their pilots spoke of a black twin-tail demon that appeared without warning, a machine that hunted without light and killed without mercy. Many simply called it the Dark One. By August 1945, when the atomic bomb ended the war, the P-61 had become more than just a plane. It was a symbol of how science and courage had fused to master the night itself. In those last quiet weeks as the war's fires dimmed, the Widows flew one final patrol over the Pacific. No radar contacts, no enemy left, only the faint hum of engines over the sea and the glow of dawn rising beyond the clouds. For once, a pilot wrote in his logbook, the night belonged to no one. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the world woke to peace. But for the men who had flown through darkness, the silence was unsettling. The P-61 crews returned to bases that had already begun to empty. Their aircraft, once whispered about in fear by the Luftwaffe and the Imperial Japanese Navy, now sat in neat rows under the rising sun, their black paint dulled by salt and time. They had no parades waiting for them, no ticker tape. Theirs had been a war fought in shadow, unseen, uncelebrated, but indispensable. At war's end, the U.S. Army Air Forces counted over 127 aerial victories credited to the P-61 Black Widow across both the European and Pacific theaters. Yet those numbers told only part of the story. How many bombers made it home because of a silent guardian they never saw? How many raids succeeded because radar eyes in the dark had cleared the skies first? No one would ever know. The last mission. In August 1945, one final sortie was flown, an unplanned mission that would etch the P-61 into the very last page of the war. A Black Widow named Lady in the Dark, flying with the 548th Night Fighter Squadron, was patrolling over Ieshima, near Okinawa. On the night of August 14th, radar picked up a slow-moving Japanese aircraft, one of the last still airborne after Tokyo's surrender broadcast. The Widow gave chase. No moon, no horizon, just a faint blip on the screen, and a voice whispering coordinates in the dark. The pilot closed in, pulled the trigger, tracers flared and vanished. No explosion followed. The Japanese plane dove hard, spiraling toward the sea. No kill confirmed, but when dawn broke, reports came in. Wreckage found on the coast. It was, as records later confirmed, the last enemy aircraft destroyed by U.S. forces in World War II. And it was done in the dark by a Black Widow, forgotten in daylight. When the war ended, new machines captured the world's imagination. The gleaming silver jets, the bright-nosed Mustangs, and the bombers that had delivered the atomic age. The P-61, designed for a kind of war no one wanted to fight again, was quietly retired. By 1949, most were scrapped or sold for parts. For decades, few remembered their contribution. The radar, and once top secret, became the foundation for modern airborne interception systems. The doctrine of night fighting evolved into all-weather interception, the direct ancestor of Cold War jet tactics. But the men who had flown them remembered every heartbeat in the dark, the green glow of the radar scope, the hollow thud of cannons in the night, the silence afterward, heavy, absolute. A pilot from the 422nd Squadron once said, "We never saw the sun rise over our victories, but we saw the world sleep a little safer." Legacy of the Widow. Today, only a handful of P-61s survive in museums, silent, dusted, and massive. Visitors are often struck by their size, almost as large as a medium bomber, yet agile as a fighter. Few realize that inside those dark fuselages once pulsed one of the most advanced pieces of technology of the 1940s, the SCR-720 radar, the brain that allowed man and machine to see through blackness. That fusion, human instinct and machine intelligence, marked a quiet revolution in warfare. It wasn't just about shooting down aircraft. It was about redefining how war was fought, not through brute force, but through awareness. The ability to see what others could not. In that sense, the P-61 wasn't merely a night fighter. It was the beginning of a new age, the era of electronic warfare. And yet, for all its innovation, its legacy remains profoundly human. Each mission depended on trust, between pilot and radar operator, between voice and hand, between sight and belief. They flew into nothingness, guided only by the heartbeat of a green dot and the bond of men who refused to fear the dark. As the years passed, veterans of the night fighter squadrons began to fade away. Their stories surfaced in fragments, diary entries, photos, a few interviews. One letter, written by a radar operator in 1945, captured it best. "The world will never know what it's like to fly blind through a storm, chasing a ghost. We hunted shadows, and sometimes we became them, but we never failed the men sleeping below." When historians speak of the P-51 Mustang, the B-17 Flying Fortress, or the Spitfire, they speak of daylight heroes, bright skies, clear victories. But the P-61 Black Widow belonged to another realm entirely. It ruled the hours when courage was measured not by light, but by faith in the unseen. And for one brief moment in history, when fear ruled the night, it was the widow who hunted the hunters.